All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this event. Thank you for attending and happy Earth Day to everybody. The day started off with some exciting announcements from the US administration to reduce emissions by half by 2030, from the Brazilian government on deforestation. And these lead us to questions about what are some of the economic consequences of these commitments. And it comes with great honor that I will introduce the panelists for today, where we're going to be talking about the intersection between economics and the environment, because climate change and environmental issues are not just an existential threat to our planet, but also to our livelihood and to our economies. And we often hear about actually a trade-off between the environment and the economy, where protecting the environment necessarily comes at a cost to the economy. But actually there can be complementarities, and we talk a lot about the promise of the green economy. And so we're here to disentangle those links of the relationship between the environment and the economy. And to help us do that, we have a very exciting panel of experts here with us today. So let me introduce our panelists. Our first panelist is Andreas Karelas, who is actually an SIS alum, so it makes us particularly excited to welcome him here. We wish that you could welcome you on campus, obviously, but welcome to this virtual SIS community. Andreas is the founder and executive director of RE-volv, which is a nonprofit organization that empowers people around the country to help nonprofits in their communities go solar and to raise awareness about the benefits of clean energy. And Andreas has a number of fellowships, including the Audubon TogetherGreen Conservation Leadership Fellow, and he is also the OpenIDEO Climate Innovator Fellow. So welcome, Andreas.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Our second panelist is Irina Marquina. Irina is a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council, working in the Global Energy Center. She publishes on climate and energy policy, and in particular works on transatlantic relations. She's also the corporate sustainability manager at Baker Hughes and is responsible for the development as well as the execution of sustainability and net zero energy transition strategies. Previously, she served right here in DC as the Senior Energy Advisor to the European Union Ambassador to the United States. Welcome, Irina.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be a part of this event.
Good, great. And last but not least, we have Priya Shamsundar, who is the lead economist at the Nature Conservancy, where she leads a team that works on the economics of conservation and environmental management. And her work has a particular focus on economic development. So she works on things like valuing the benefits, the costs, and the distributional impacts of environmental intervention, as well as the design of those interventions to encourage action on environmental issues. She sat on a number of advisory panels with notably the government of Canada, the government of India, and the World Bank. So welcome, Priya.
Pleasure.
So a couple of logistics. This event is going to last for an hour. We will have time for Q&A at the end of the event. Please feel free to write your questions at any point in the chat function. The answers to the questions will not be typed in the Q&A function, but there is closed captioning for the event that will last the entire event. We ask that you please do not record this event. It is already recorded and it will be posted on the SIS YouTube channel. All right, so with that done, let's dive straight into the questions to hear from our experts. I want to start off with a big picture question to each of you. I want you to tell me what you see as the single biggest challenge to being able to balance the economy, the environment, and energy use. So Irina, why don't we start with you?
Thank you, Claire. I think we're starting off with the toughest question that one can think of. So from my perspective, normally the answer would be, as the toughest challenge, the lack of political will or short-termism. However, this is not the day to say that. I am very encouraged by the announcement of the US in DC and also the political agreement in the European Union yesterday to increase its interim 2030 target to 55%. I think that the world is optimistic and the global leaders summit in the United States is still ongoing. And so I think the political will increasingly is accumulating, and it's great to have United States to join that growing crowd. I think I see as the greatest challenge is the need for optimal change management. So we need to ensure that the global energy transition that is currently ongoing creates expected redistributional effects. We want to make sure that the implications of the energy transition do not leave anyone behind. I think there was already some movement on the part of, for instance, European Union government, as well as Biden administration, to focus on the just transition, for instance, with the EU's Just Transition Fund of the $140 billion, or US commitment to spend 40% of clean energy and infrastructure investment in underprivileged communities. So I think that this challenge is increasingly rising to the top of the political agenda. But I think ultimately this will continue being a very important issue going forward as we advance in the energy transition.
Thank you very much. And I agree very much. Andreas, same question to you. What do you think?
I completely echo what Irina said, and I would, add to that here in the United States, one of the exciting trends that we're seeing is that the political context and conversation is changing. As I was researching, writing my book, Climate Courage, what I found is that 2/3 of Americans now understand that climate change is real and caused by humans, and 85% of Americans want to see 100% clean energy. So there's actually much more sort of consensus around the solutions and moving forward than there has been in the past. And I think that's exciting to see, and hopefully will empower the Biden administration and other leaders of the world to recognize that America is sort of changing its pitch. But in terms of the challenges, yes, I mean, like Irina said, it's really an equity question. We want to make sure that what was the historic impact of the fossil fuel industry, where communities of color, low-income communities, disenfranchised communities bore the brunt of the dirty economy, that we want to make sure that they are first in line to receive the benefits of the clean energy economy. Mark Jacobson at Stanford University and his team have found that when we achieve 100% clean energy, that we will have a net increase of 2 million jobs, and that we will save $1 trillion on our electricity costs. But in that 2 million increase in jobs is also loss of jobs, right? People from the fossil fuel industry will be out of work. So how do we make sure that there is a just transition so that the people that are affected, that are currently vested in the fossil fuel industry, will be able to benefit, and that we can lift all boats with the clean energy sort of economy that is at our doorstep.
Yeah, thank you. And that's important, not just for the the good of the people that you're describing, but also for the political aspect, right? In order to be able to pass these regulations. Priya, what do you think?
Well, agreeing completely with colleagues who so clearly identified the challenges. It's important, somebody said this, so this is not my quote, but the one thing about climate change is that it isn't one thing, right? So it's multiple things. So that you can't be thinking of it as one challenge. It's a challenge that we need to address on so many different fronts. Of course, we have to decarbonize our economies through emission cuts, and we have to do them quickly in order to meet our net zero emission targets by mid-century, 2050, 2060. And these cuts have to be deep. And therefore, in some cases, they will not be just. And that's the worry about just transitions. It's sort of doing it fast because it will get more costly as we wait. and making sure they are deep enough so we can sort of atone for what we've already done and manage the stock of carbon in the atmosphere. But we also, I want to pick up a little bit on what Andreas said. We have an opportunity here to bring some more balance in how our economies grow by restoring our lands, our waters, our ecosystems, and enabling this facilitating a movement towards towards emission cuts or offsets, and allowing us to adapt to climate change a bit better through nature-based solutions. And it's an opportunity because it's not going to automatically get realized, right? This means, because it hasn't happened, we've been degrading these natural systems for years now. So for us to take advantage of this time where we're so worried about climate change, where we understand that nature offers some solutions, both to address mitigation and to adapt to climate change, we will need to make a lot of changes and changing our laws, our policies, our institutions, and our own actions. And so, I'm sorry, I don't have one challenge, but I want us to think about doing it all.
Let's do it. We can have it all.
Let's do it.
So talking about these challenges, actually, this is a great segue for the first question that I want to ask Andreas, which is, you've worked with your organization called RE-volv on solar adoption by NGOs. And I want you to tell us a little bit about what you found to be the most important drivers so that to convince NGOs to go solar, but also what are some of the concerns that you're hearing from NGOs as they're thinking about this transition?
Sure. So RE-volv is a nonprofit organization that I founded in 2011. And what we do is help nonprofits, community-based nonprofits go solar. So when you think about schools, homeless shelters, health clinics, houses of worship, et cetera. And really, Claire, I think it's not so much about what are their challenges in terms of their interest. It's really more the challenges that they face in getting financing. So there are 1.5 million nonprofits in the United States, and typically don't have capital on hand to pay for the upfront costs of solar. And because of the way that the tax credits for solar energy are structured in the United States, it leaves out nonprofits. So nonprofits, while the average homeowner or the average business in the United States can go solar for zero down and get financing pretty effectively, nonprofits are basically completely left out. So all these nonprofits are really kind of clamoring for this opportunity. Like, we would love to go solar, we would love to save money on our electricity bills, and we would love to demonstrate to our community members that we care about the climate, that we are saving money, and sort of lead by example. So that's really what RE-volv is doing. We've helped close to 50 nonprofits in 10 states go solar at this point, and they're saving $17 million on their electricity bills, which they can then put back into their community, feeding the hungry, providing beds for the homeless, et cetera. And so to me, I think that's really the bigger picture sort of message that I like to share, is that one of the important factors that we found in the solar industry is that there's what's called the seeding effect, or the ripple effect, or even the contagious effect of solar, which is that when one person goes solar, their neighbor is more likely to go solar, and their neighbor is even more likely. And so this is sort of a secret weapon that we have that we can use to sort of plant seeds for solar energy and allow communities to feel more comfortable with it and adopt it more readily. So our theory of change at RE-volv is, with each nonprofit that we're solarizing, and then we tell those stories and we make videos and we promote it to the community, that we can really get people excited and they can see it and they can feel the tangible benefits. My child goes to the school, and now, because they're solar powered, the school is able to offer more programs and resources for the students. And now I see how solar energy benefits me directly. And that's really, at the end of the day, when it comes to climate change, it's not a technical or economic question. We have the technology, we have the financing. It's more a social and a political question. So we have to think about, how do we affect and change people's hearts and minds? And that's really, it's storytelling, it's community-based projects that people can really see the benefits. So that's what we're focused on.
That's great. And those peer effects are very important. And we're hoping that seeing your excitement is also a great peer effect on our current group of students looking at, all the exciting things you can do with an SIS degree. So going back to another group question, I want to ask each of you at all the levels that you're working at, when you think about governments and communities, they don't only have climate change as a challenge, right? They're facing a number of other challenges like poverty, education, health. And so how do you convince the entities that you work with that directing some of their limited funds towards environmentally friendly projects is worth it, especially when they might have more immediate concerns, whereas investing in the environment might be a longer term investment? Priya, why don't we start with you for this one?
Sure. I can think of sort of maybe 3 or 4 ways to make it a compelling reason for governments in particular to take this very seriously. One is it's no longer something that will happen, right? Climate change is happening now. Look at the forest fires, look at the floods. People are hurting, people are dying as a result of extreme events that are driven by warming. And I think everybody is beginning to recognize it and realizes that they have to take this on in one way or the other as a leader or a follower, but they can't ignore it anymore. The other important narrative to make crystal clear is that it gets costlier as you wait. It's not going to get any less costly. You're going to have to deal with it. You're just going to be paying more in terms of how you do it. I think there was some recent analysis in the US that suggested that if we waited till 2030, the cost of addressing or meeting our net zero goals would increase by 50%. So it's not just a little bit costly, it's a lot costlier if you wait to take action. So that's the other part of it. The other part of it, which really bothers me tremendously, is that, we've just as my colleagues just talked about recently, climate change has disproportionate impacts on the poor, whether it is the poor in rich countries or poor countries relative to rich countries. We've made tremendous gains over the last century in reducing poverty, and we are at the risk of sliding back because of the effects of climate change. And we've got to be able to tell the story to communities and governments so that they can take action. And there's one statistic that I read somewhere that climate change has increased the gap between poorest and richest countries by about 25% percentage points. So it's sort of widened that gap because it affects colder climates differently than warmer climates, and poor countries are in warm climates. And the last, you can scare communities and governments. That'll take you so far, but you also have to show them that there are co-benefits. And this is the happy story that Andreas says. There are air pollution reduction benefits, there are health benefits, there are increased opportunities for jobs related to restoration. You can improve your agriculture by improving your soil health. So there are global benefits that climate mitigation offers, and there are very local co-benefits. And we have to identify those co-benefits and put them in front of our communities and governments to convince them.
Yeah, thank you. That was a very complete answer. I'm curious to see how others are going to build on this. Irina, what do you think?
I think that, in general, I think climate action now increasingly is seen as a business opportunity. If you look at the market and the opportunity that is there, so just when it comes to low or middle income countries, there is 32 trillion of investment needed to support Paris Agreement objectives. Now, if you look at the market last year, the world invested $500 billion into low carbon technologies. CCUS investment tripled, huge investment in hydrogen, renewables, EVs, 140 billion. So there is increasingly movement in that market, and companies see an opportunity and market share in that space. So I think that long gone are the days where we saw climate action as an economic impediment. Right now, it's a question of global competitiveness. And so no matter which hat I wear, be it my former EU hat or think tank hat or say the corporation that I work for, we increasingly look at investments as an opportunity, how the market growth is going. And I'd like to pick up on a point from Priya regarding the support to low and middle income countries. I think it's very important to ensure that there is a coordination of investment strategies. Right now, private sector, even if it's a business opportunity, is still looking after profits. So it's very important to direct those investment flows into right categories of investment. And so I personally would like to see more coordination at the global level amongst large investors. So EU is the largest development finance donor. You have United States. Multilateral development banks are coming up with climate plans. So European Investment Bank, World Bank announced a climate plan during the Spring World Bank Week. So I think there increasingly needs to be more coordination on this finance, because sometimes countries are pulled into different directions in terms of which technology which country promotes. So I would say, I think, to sum up, business opportunity, it is an opportunity to lift people out of poverty, and we need more coordination among global powers.
Yeah, absolutely. Andreas, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with Priya and Irina. And I think, yeah, to build on Irina's points about that it's not a trade-off. It's not a question of environment or the economy. This is the economic momentum of the 21st century. This is where we are going, regardless of whether policy supports it or not. Bloomberg has reported that within the next 10 years, those that have built natural gas plants now will be left with stranded assets because the cost of clean energy will be undercutting those costs, and they will no longer be able to sell power competitively. And that's without policy, right? That's just the costs of clean energy dropping so precipitously. And again, in terms of the business sector, of the top 6 most highly valued companies in the world, 5 of them are already 100% renewable energy powered. And it's partly because their customers are demanding it, but it's also because they recognize that this is an investment in their company's future. And so I think that's really the messaging that we need to be leading with. And frankly, I'm quite pleased with the Biden administration's sort of framing of it. Joe Biden has famously said, when I think of climate change, I think of jobs, right? And that's really the marrying of the narrative that we need to be focusing on, because this $2 trillion infrastructure bill is looking at not only how do we solve the climate crisis, and it is the most significant climate change legislation we've ever seen, but it is also marrying that with how do we revamp our economy after this pandemic, how do we bring people back to work, and how do we jumpstart sort of our businesses. And so by thinking about those hand in hand, we can actually sort of solve 2 birds with 1 stone, sort of solve 2 problems at the same time, but also realize and change the narrative that it's no longer about environment versus economy, but that these are very much tied, and we can lift all boats. We can create the economic sort of benefits that we need while solving the climate crisis and creating an investment in the future.
Yeah, I agree. And actually, I think every single one of the papers I write could be titled 2 birds, 1 stone. I've only named one of them that way. So Priya, I want to ask you about your work on conservation. And in particular, you work a lot with forests. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what role forests can play in addressing climate change, and how we should think about the opportunities for the industries who rely on resources from forests.
Yeah, so there's a lot of excitement now about natural climate solutions. Forests are a sink for carbon, and when you cut down trees and forests, you release carbon into the atmosphere. When you restore lands, you can capture carbon. So natural climate solutions, as they're called, at least in the short to medium term. They're not a substitute for emission cuts. I want to be very clear about it. But they offer opportunities, and if they're done well, they offer opportunities for climate mitigation, as well as biodiversity conservation and livelihoods for rural communities. Everything depends on implementation, but they are potentially a win-win solution on multiple fronts. We did work, for example, looking at 90 tropical countries around the world. And our estimates suggest that just with a modest sort of payment and incentive payment, you can get significant reductions in avoided deforestation and reforestation with significant carbon benefits, which would allow us to stay on track to meet the 2 degrees Celsius warming goal, across the tropics. So there are these opportunities, and what we're also finding is that even as economies and firms strive to reduce their emissions, they're looking for opportunities to offset the hard to immediately cut emissions through offsets and through investments in nature-based solutions. There's huge demand now. You're seeing some of the growth in offset emissions in the space of agriculture and land, particularly, is significant. We haven't found easy ways to meet that demand as yet. So there's this huge opportunity waiting for using carbon financing to do some of the restoration work that needs to be done and to reduce deforestation and increase reforestation. And that needs to sort of take off. It's at the stage where it's about to take off, I think, but and it's happening.
Thank you. Yeah, I want to come back to the offsets a little bit later. But for now, I want to ask Irina to tell us a little bit about what's happening. The EU has laid out some ambitious climate goals, and I would like you to tell us, how the EU has done so far in terms of energy diversification, and whether we can expect the trends to change, and thinking about if other countries wanted to do the same thing, what kind of lessons can we draw from the EU experience, both positive or negative?
I would say that, so I follow now EU's energy and climate policy for over a decade. And so the former energy and climate package largely focused on 3 top objectives: emissions reductions, increase of renewables, as well as energy efficiency. And so the 2020 package was largely achieved. So EU overshot its emissions reductions target. And so it's quite remarkable that we are in year 2021 and we see a target of 55% reduction for the next decade. So I think this is truly significant. And on top of this, European Parliament was asking for more. So you see that the ambition is there. The political agreement that was reached yesterday also includes commitment to negative carbon emissions beyond 2050. So I think at this point, EU has gone as far as it could because it's already thinking of the future past 2050. Now, there were also significant infrastructure investments made. For instance, prior to year 2020, there was at least 750 million euros invested in LNG technology. So there is a huge build out of infrastructure to connect the market in Central and Eastern Europe. So obviously right now we know that the priorities have shifted. There is a much stronger focus on sustainability. I think another key achievement is the fact that EU took a very holistic approach early on. So the EU's climate neutrality strategy was announced in December of 2019. And already that plan had very specific action points for every sector of the economy. So if you take transportation, agriculture, finance sector, if you take manufacturing or consumer goods from the perspective of circular economy, oceans and environment policy, there are very specific action points and legislative proposals put on the table. And so I think the most important lesson learned for me is to take what Biden administration is currently doing, to take a holistic approach and incorporate a number of sectors. In the past, energy and climate policy that just lived in its own silos. We had climate targets, those applied to energy sector, at best power sector. Right now, we have a very broad focus economy-wide. Another example of this, very ambitious regulation in the finance sector, the sustainable finance taxonomy, the fact that there is increasingly an interest to build an international coalition around sustainable finance. So I think that countries can learn from that. I think this is really the major achievement, the holistic approach to tackling climate change.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you. So before I move on to the Q&A, I want to ask another group question, and I want us to think forward and think positive. And I would like you to tell me what you see as the biggest opportunity in this climate, energy, environment, and economy nexus. Andreas, why don't we start with you this time?
Sure. This is a phenomenal question, and really, you know, I wrote a book, Climate Courage, that came out in September, and this is really the main point of the book, is that we have for so long considered solving the climate crisis as a, quote, inconvenient truth, that in order to solve the climate crisis, we have to inconvenience ourselves, that it's going to require personal sacrifice and economic, you know, sort of challenges and all of these things. And I think that that's changed. You know, I think that that's completely changed. Even in the past 10 years since I started RE-volv, the cost of solar panels have dropped 90%. And, you know, we are, as I mentioned, you know, we know that when we get to 100% clean energy, that we can, you know, create new jobs, you know, save money on our electricity bills, and also just how we live our lives. I think the ways that we can live that will sort of benefit the environment are actually much more in line with our own happiness, health, well-being as human beings and communities. So to me, there's actually a very sort of positive future that increases the well-being and the happiness of all of us. And actually, you know, to tie back to SIS, you know, what I wrote my, you know, senior research, you know, on when I was a student at SIS was really about how solving the climate crisis at a global level requires a level of international cooperation that we've never seen before, that the world has never had to come together this quickly and this sort of tactically to solve a climate, to solve a problem. And so coming from the sort of fields of environmental peacemaking and conflict resolution, how can we use the climate crisis as a way to solve other problems, right? If we can come to, and of course the verdict is still out of whether the world's powers will be able to come together quickly enough and sort of put down their defenses and be able to work together collaboratively. But if we can, and the conference that's happening today and tomorrow is a good sign of that, if we are able to sort of work together collaboratively, think about all the other problems that we could solve as a globe, right? Using this as an example. So that's my hope for the future.
I love the optimism. Priya, do you share that optimism?
Yes, I do. Perhaps not with the level of enthusiasm Andreas brings to the table. I have to be honest about that. But, you know, we've seen changes in the renewable energy space. This is exactly what Andreas, you know, has discussed. It didn't used to be like this, but it's now. Prices have dropped, and everywhere you see solar panels, and you know, for homes and for industry and for electricity generation. So it's happened in the renewable energy space. But we have to now have the same sort of change that happened with renewables happen in the restoration economy space. you need to get those kinds of jobs and livelihood opportunities that would enable us to restore our lands and waters and mitigate and, very importantly, we haven't discussed this much, adapt to climate change. It's happening. We have got to adapt. And we can use some of these solutions to adapt to climate change, but we've got to act in the restoration space. Similarly, with climate smart agriculture, hey, we managed the green revolution. Why not the evergreen revolution, right? Why not be climate smart and use our soils better than we have before and use our technologies to build an agriculture that can feed us, but not hurt the, not degrade the earth any further. So I think we can do it. We need policies and institutions to change. So I don't want to underestimate that challenge. It doesn't happen on its own. But we have to ask for that change. And this is a message to the students. We don't ask for the change loudly. It's not going to happen. So we've got to keep asking for those changes.
Yeah, absolutely. Very important message for sure. Irina, what do you think of opportunities?
I have a three-part answer to this. So first, when we look at the facts on the ground, if we look at the analysis that came out this week from International Energy Agency, it essentially said that we'll have a 5% increase in greenhouse gas emissions, 60% increase in coal demand, which was personally extremely surprising to me, increase in natural gas consumption, and a slight increase in renewable energy. And so if we take the facts on the ground and the market dynamics, which is very different in the pandemic year where the dynamic has changed, I think there are known knowns, the opportunities that we can see for decarbonization. So such technologies as hydrogen, right, for decarbonization of a hard to abate sector, so CCUS, these are the opportunities that I see. And then there is I would say, third basket of issues which are underappreciated. And by that, I mean the new emerging trend of digitalization. So right now we see a sustainability megatrend as well as digitalization moving in parallel. So in the digitalization space, we talk about privacy, we talk about AI, we talk about cybersecurity. And so the connection between the two is not appreciated, but there are a lot of market leaders that are increasingly capitalizing on their interconnection. So if you take a tech sector, there are a lot of interesting ideas that are coming out from the tech companies on climate solution for technology. There are also very interesting partnerships in the market between more integrated companies like ourselves, or say Siemens, Schneider Electric, and others that offer technology solutions that help to decarbonize, that say utilize artificial intelligence. And so previously we saw digital technology only as a technology that delivers operational efficiencies. Right now, I think it's increasingly interpreted as also offering sustainability benefits. And I think as we go much more into the world of Internet of Things and the economy becomes increasingly ever interconnected, we will see many more advantages and focus on digitalization. So to give you one example, the EU's digital economy strategy this time around only incorporated a few paragraphs on the contribution of the tech sector, on the uptake of renewable energy. But I think that there is a great opportunity to talk about technology as a key decarbonization pathway and to explore all of the opportunities that it can bring. So that's where I see the opportunity in the future.
Yeah, and there's a lot that we probably can't even imagine right now that's going to happen on that front in the coming years for sure. So I'd like to move to the Q&A now. We have a number of questions. And so the first one goes to Andreas, I think. What is the payback time for going majorly solar?
Yeah, payback for solar. So it depends on where in the country you are. For example, if you live in, California, where it's very sunny and where there's a robust solar industry, so the costs have come down, the average homeowner is going to get a full payback on their solar system within 5 to 10 years, probably on the lower end of that, maybe 5 to 7 years. So, you put up $10,000, you solarize your home completely, and then within 5 to 7 years, you'll have recouped your investment, and then your solar system will be producing free power for the next 20 to 30 years, moving forward. So, so that's, in other parts of the country where the cost of electricity is cheaper, it might be a little bit longer, but really across the board, it always makes sense, and it's probably one of the best investments you can make, if you have the capital. Although, again, I think what most people do is, most of us don't have, $10,000 or however much it will cost lying around to put solar up. And so what you do is you go through a third party financier through a lease or a power purchase agreement or a loan. And that way you can go solar for zero down, start saving money right away, and obviously, reduce your environmental footprint. So, so there are lots of ways to do it. In any event, it's one of the best investments you can make.
Yeah, really a no-brainer at this point. Irina, the next question is for you. You mentioned that you would like to see more coordination on the finance of climate change. What type of investments do you think are most important to coordinate with international institutions, i.e. bonds, funding, equities, etc.?
What type of investments and also what types of technologies? I think that early on there was a movement, including during the time of the Obama administration, to create a global coalition moving investment or essentially prohibiting development finance in coal development. I think this would be one huge windfall, and I think also currently World Bank no longer finances coal in developing countries. I think this would be one specific example, also in light of the findings that we see now from the IEA that the coal consumption would grow in the next year. Now, when it comes to specific instruments, I think that there is a lot of innovation there, right? So if you take private sector alone, this week, I believe, 3 largest US American banks announced their climate commitments, and they offer different instruments in terms of how they would meet those commitments. So there's innovation within the private sector space, but then there's also, I guess, room for governments to coordinate. So there were, for instance, this morning, the head of the IMF said that she would like to include climate assessments in loan agreements that IMF makes with developing countries. So I think I think we need more of a global agreement on technologies, and then the instrument comes as a second topic.
Great, thank you. I have a question that I'm going to pose to the panel and whoever wants to take it. What is the panelist views on water desalination, considering that many people are saying that the next war will be fought over water? Priya, would you like to take this one?
Oh, I'm certainly not an expert. Certainly not an expert on water. So, and I do not have an answer on desalination at all. It is certainly one of the biggest resource problems that we face in many parts of the world. My experience is largely in India, and there are sort of conflicts that range from very minor to very, very major. And the unpredictability that climate change brings to pre-existing overuse of water problems is enormous, because the glaciers are melting in the Himalayas, and that increases water supply to some extent, and then will decrease water supply. And so there's just, all I can say is this is a very major issue, but it is not an area that at least I can provide a good expert comment on, especially related to desalination.
Fair enough. The next question is for Irina, I think.
Claire, actually, if I could, sorry,
No,
if I
go
could
ahead,
just,
please.
offer one, quick thought on the desal. So, there are, the current state of the desalination technology is oftentimes pretty detrimental to the environment in terms of the way that the water is pumped back out into the ocean once it has been desalinated, et cetera. But I do think that there are ways to improve that and make that better. The biggest issue is around the cost of the energy, right? It requires a lot of energy to run desalination. And so that has been the prohibiting factor. But you're seeing examples like in Israel, for example, where they are using clean energy to power desal plants. So that to me is a marrying that could be very promising in the future if we're able to solve sort of the technology issues around the sustainability in the ocean. But I do think it is a promising opportunity, as clean energy ramps up, to that desal could be explored and continue to be implemented.
Thank you. So the next question is about EU policies and notably about carbon border adjustments. Where is the EU in the process of introducing a carbon tariff? What is the evolving position of the Biden administration on such a tariff on the EU's part? And how can we reconcile this with WTO rules?
It's a very interesting question. I would say also a very controversial one. So let me just say at the beginning, I do not represent the EU. That is quite clear. And then I can launch into my thoughts. I guess, again, three parts to answer on this. So interesting to note that carbon border adjustment mechanism was identified as one of the, I guess, financial instruments when the EU stimulus was announced last year. So I think this shows that EU is quite serious about executing or implementing this proposal. So we're expecting a final proposal to be made later this year. This will come out as a package or the legislative package with a couple of other items. I believe it will come out as a part of the Fit for 50/50, so for the package, which is, I guess, relation to the new 2030 target. Now on WTO, interesting to note that EU had released a communication on the transatlantic agenda for global cooperation. And as a part of that communication, there was a provision essentially proposing to create a climate initiative as a part of the WTO deliberations. So I think that, a lot of people argue, is it compatible with WTO? But another way to argue is WTO compatible with the new climate agenda? So we have to see where this lands. I think that this is still a part of the intergovernmental discussions. Different countries have different view on this target, which is essentially addressed for protecting national industry and avoiding carbon leakage. So I think we'll just have to see the details, assess the final details, and then when it comes to US administration, I think most recently we saw the comments from Special Envoy Kerry, and I think he expressed some caution on this topic and appealed to the EU.
Yeah, thank you. Priya, the next question is for you. Given the agricultural industry is one, if not the largest lobbying industry in the world, do you have any thoughts on how they could be convinced to go sustainable?
Yeah, so agriculture, forestry, and land use are a significant contributor to global emissions, about a quarter or close to that. And I think the agricultural sector does see the writing on the wall. The impacts on agriculture have also been significant, and that's another it opens the curtain on what is happening with agriculture. It's just a very recent study that came out that suggests that global agricultural productivity between 1961 and 2020 has, climate change has resulted in about something like 21% reduction in global agricultural productivity, directly related to climate change. So on the one hand, you're seeing this decline in productivity, which is so very clear. On the other hand, you're seeing this sector contributing to emissions. So I think the big agricultural industries are recognizing this and beginning to, just as in any other sector, sort of trying to figure out how they can offer a leadership role in this. I can tell you more specifically in the context of work that we're doing in India. We have an interesting case there where agriculture, now it's not large holders, but a multiplicity of farmers contribute to air pollution because they burn their residue on the ground as they move from one crop to another. And it is, we are now working over there to reduce the air pollution impacts of the burning, which can also contribute to reductions in greenhouse gas emissions and in soil health if the right technological solutions are put forward. And we're working with a multiplicity of partners to make that happen. So, there are opportunities to reduce the footprint of agriculture, to take on sort of regenerative agricultural activities. And I think the larger industry has come to recognize this and is working to put in the investments, hopefully quickly, to make this happen.
Thank you. The next question I'm going to pose to the panel. What are high-income developed countries doing, and how are they going to support the devastating effects of climate change on low-income countries like those in sub-Saharan Africa? What could these developing countries creatively do to overcome those effects?
Low income, I'm sorry, I missed that. What was that?
So the question is about how high-income countries can help low-income countries deal with the effects of climate change, and what developing countries can do creatively to deal with this.
I'll just, high level say that, the United States is historically the largest emitter, as the wealthiest country in the world, and the main driver of the climate change that we're seeing today and the warming that we'll see in the future has a moral imperative to the rest of the world, especially to the parts of the world that are going to be hit first and worst, that contributed nothing to the problem, right? And so there is absolutely a moral question that needs to be resolved. There many there have been and will continue to be mechanisms discussed for financing and technology transfer and the like, which are it's a good start, but certainly nowhere near where it needs to be, or where the developing countries that are looking at this and saying, wait a minute, we didn't do anything to cause this problem, and we're experiencing the worst of it, are requiring, and which needs to be. So, and that is going to require political will in the United States to sort of muster behind that. So it's something that we need to keep pushing for, but just wanted to point that out, that it's this is 100% a justice and a moral question.
If I may to add on top, I agree with Andreas, and I want to add that I think one concrete way is to deliver on the $100 billion commitment within the UNCCC framework that was made to the developing countries. This is a very specific action that where the commitment was made, and of course we're falling short on delivering on this, and I understand that this will be a part of the Glasgow COP26. This will be an important part of the discussion. And I think what developing countries really need is capacity building. Very often there is a resource, there are interested companies to invest, but there's just no infrastructure, there's no regulatory capacity to absorb the investment, to administer the investment. So I think a lot of the support needs to focus on capacity building, on execution, on building competitive markets, or in fact creating markets in some cases, on building the institutions, because very often it's difficult for companies to come into countries where they may see the return, but just above the ground factors are just too great. And so I think there is a strong imperative for us to focus on this topic.
Yeah, I just reinforced what the high-level comments made by Irina and Andreas. Stick to the commitments made for financing, create opportunities for private investments to come in, because the public sector is just not going to be able to meet the entirety of the financing needs for required for mitigating climate change and adapting to climate change. There have been some interesting discussions. Again, Irina spoke to some of these between the World Bank and the IMF of thinking of new ways to address loan-related issues by making investments in climate. So maybe there are some new financing instruments that might become available to low and middle income countries. So the flow of resources, monetary and ideas, and matched by capacity building and support for creating the right regulatory frameworks that would allow the benefits to flow evenly towards developing countries would be very useful.
I'm going to sneak in one more question. We have 2 more minutes. Can the panelists speak to the need and how to pay for secondary investments necessary for incorporating more renewables in grid electricity provision to accommodate intermittency? I have in mind need for broader transmission networks, especially in development countries, and small system operating systems to dispatch loads everywhere. Andreas, do you want to say?
I think it's a tough question, but go ahead, Andreas.
No, please, Irina, please.
I was just going to say it's a very interesting question, but I think it's a very simple answer. We just need investment in transmission. It's extremely hard to site transmission, and the current funding instruments don't quite deliver. I find it quite surprising that, in fact, a lot of the transmission is above ground in cities. So I think this is really outdated. We need better transmission to make sure that the renewable energy can travel from generation centers to demand centers. This is truly a huge challenge, in particular in the United States.
Yeah, and I would just add to that. We're actually at a point where we are sort of reinventing the grid. We have, the age-old technology that currently runs the grid here in the United States needs to be revamped in and of itself. And in parts of the world where, we know that 1 billion people lack access to reliable electricity, it won't make economic sense to build out the same type of grid that we have here there.
Right.
You don't want a big power plant running power lines, far distances into villages that don't have current electricity. What is going to be the wave of the future is a decentralized, distributed, and democratized energy system. So one example to point to is Puerto Rico, where after Hurricane Maria, the electric grid was completely wiped out, and the utility and the regulators in Puerto Rico have decided to build a 100% renewable energy grid, and it is based on microgrids and mini grids that are going to be a more resilient, sort of distributed way of bringing power to the island. So that's what we're starting to see, happen in places where they don't already have an existing infrastructure, and that's also what we're going to see here in the United States. I mean, in California, all the projects that we build want to be able to have solar plus storage and local microgrids so that they can island. So we're going to be moving into a grid it's sort of a new way of thinking about it. We're not just consumers of power, but we are all both producers and consumers of power and sharing power back and forth with our neighbors. So it's sort of, there is a leap to be made there technologically, but it's very quickly happening.
Yeah, I was going to, Andreas, you said exactly what was on my mind, that you need decentralized energy production and distribution. And especially in low and middle income countries, you need a new set of institutions to manage all of that. So it's, investments in those sort of localized abilities to produce energy and distribute it, but also how does all of that happen? The existing type of electricity utilities can't manage those. So you need to be thinking about new institutional frameworks to make that happen.
Thank you very much. So unfortunately, we're out of time. There are a number of questions that we didn't get a chance to get to, but I want to encourage the audience to reach out to the panelists directly if they have more questions. Their emails can be found very easily online. And I want to thank the panelists very much for this really interesting conversation and for giving us a realistic but quite optimistic point of view on the situation. And on Earth Day, this is exactly what we needed. So thank you very much. And thank you for everyone for attending.